Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome to the 51st audio file in the audiocast series known as the Q News Patriot. I am the Q News Patriot, coming to you now for the third time on this particular audio file. My name is SGAnon. It's been quite a last few days, hasn't it? I think the last time that we came together on air in this fashion was about 9 or 10 days ago. Tremendous amounts of disclosure and declass are happening at a rate that is really difficult to keep up with, certainly difficult to quantify. We have the hardcore evidence now being presented through reports such as the Durham Report, other congressional investigations. Even the mainstream media is now beginning to report certain facets of the truth, certain pivotal details that are extremely important to understand the context, not only of where we've come for the past really 7 to 8 years, but where we're going to be going. Certainly the rest of this year, through the rest of next year, and then onward into the future as we rebuild our world. We're not going to get, we're not going to waste too much time today. I don't have a lot of time, actually. This is the third attempt at this particular recording, and I've got my little one. I've managed to get him occupied for a little while with my wife while I do this. But it is important, I think, to pass along some of the details that I've been researching, some of the connections that are being made by individuals that we know have been, I shouldn't say involved with Q, but have been ancillarily or proximally tied to things like the drops, certainly through President Trump's TruthSocial, through Dan Scavino's TruthSocial, Instagram and Twitter, and others. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right to it. There's a lot going on in the world. The final battle, if you will, is heating up. It's becoming a public thing, an overt thing. World War III, if we will, which has actually already been going on silently for a long time, is becoming a much more public narrative and a much more public threat. We have the fake resident, the actor Joe Biden in Japan over the last few days. We have the United States banking sector continuing to hemorrhage money at rates that has not been seen really ever in its history. We have JP Morgan freezing bank accounts across the United States in predominantly red, conservative, we the people areas. This is open war. This is not something that's really difficult to understand when we step back and we appreciate that this isn't a regular conflict. It's an espionage war, a special operation. And we have tactics being deployed by both the remnant that still remains and the good actors, what we would call the White Hat Military Alliance, to draw out, continue to drain, and disable and disempower the bad actors, even, including all sectors, right? Banking and finance, business, law, government, military, etc. To really draw them out into the light, force them to play their cards, force them to open up hidden, any hidden cards that they may have, force them to show us what is at play, excuse me, and then we're able to direct that into the public space and really compel the public narrative towards absolute truth, right? So sort of along those lines, we're going to go ahead and talk first about Russia. There are some things that are heating up and going on in and around that area of the world right now. It's important to note that former President Medvedev of Russia has come out now and said that the Baltic territories, the Baltic states, are in fact Russian, and that they need to essentially plan on rejoining Russia by the time this conflict is all over. We've talked about that for a while on this program. I think we initially broached that topic back in February or March of this year. Ancestral righting of wrongs is a key component for understanding what exactly is happening with this optical World War III. The Taiwanese island being reunited with the Chinese mainland, different territories within Europe being reunited with their appropriate ancestral heritage, for example, with the Baltic states and portions of Finland as it pertains to Russia, certainly with Ukraine as it pertains to Russia. These are very important acknowledgments that we have to have because it provides important context and a clear understanding of why these events are popping off in the fashion that they are. It's worth remembering, of course, that in these localities throughout the world, massive amounts of MKUltra, mainstream media and information control, and really information and psychological warfare have been waged on we the people to compel, really to seed and then compel these events, these beliefs, to a fever pitch point within the populations of those geographic areas where they become sort of brainwashed, just as we were brainwashed here in the United States and in the West, to really not understand who they are, where they're from. Their history has been just as distorted and obfuscated, if not more so. But that does not excuse the fact that the ancestral lineage, the ancestral right to rule, if we will, has to go back to the correct parties. It has to be returned to we the people, not only symbolically, but kinetically and physically. And so we're seeing a massive, massive ramp up in Russian military activity, to include the deployment of more than 15 nuclear capable bombers along the borders of the Baltic states, the NATO Baltic states, Finland, and of course in the Ukrainian area. This sort of coinciding with an intrusion into the Belgorod region in Russia just in the last few days. Ukrainian militants, with the assistance of British intelligence services, MI6, and I would conjecture the CIA. I've not been able to establish that, but certainly MI6 assisting in that incursion and intrusion into the Russian border. The Russian military is actually being deployed along the border internally, to include the Russian Air Force. They've actually put down that incursion, and more than 40 Ukrainian militants in that area alone were eliminated by the Air Force and by ground forces that came in to really do the job of what we would compare to the U.S. Border Patrol, for example. This is a pretext, a prelude of things to come. Military being used for protection of the nation, of the citizens, being used for certainly border enforcement. That's going to come here in the United States and elsewhere. But here in the United States, we have a much different scenario, and we're really sort of allowing this to happen so that we have a clear understanding of how important it is as a people, as a nation, to throw off that brainwashing, to understand that there is nothing anti-humanitarian, that there's nothing anti-freedom about demanding and enforcing that territorial sovereignty, that borders be respected, that they be enforced, that a legal process for immigration, migration, things of this nature be instituted and adhered to long term. So again, without getting too much into the philosophy of it, we're going to see this rehearsal, if you will, that Russia is putting out within their own, or their example, I should say, is a better word, within their own territorial sovereignty, utilizing their military forces to enforce things like the border, to handle the incursion of terrorists, to handle the incursion of militarized resistance, militarized guerrilla warfare. That's going to come to many different sectors throughout the world before it's all over. It's worth highlighting that the Russian buildup of troops in the west and southwest of the country has now eclipsed 1 million. This is a massive, massive invasion force, a massive ground-capable, force. And just recently, former President Medvedev, I keep calling him that, but I remember when I was younger that he was briefly the president of Russia. But Dmitry Medvedev has come out now and said that in 2023, just in the first 4 months alone, the Russian armed forces eclipsed more than 100,000 new troops. I would conjecture that that number is probably higher. We know that the Russian military, the Russian war machine, the industrial manufacturing capabilities of the country have been ramped up significantly. We have good evidence now to show that Chinese assets are continuing to move through the Russian countryside towards Eastern Europe, and that Russian assets are now actually deployed in the Pacific region. Just recently, we had 2 corvettes, Russian Navy corvettes, picked up by South Korea as transiting through the Sea of Japan. And then, of course, we have the evidence that goes back a couple of weeks now, where Russia and China held very significant naval drills for repelling air power, and invading, landing on an island, and ensuring that campaign is insulated, that campaign is properly conducted, and these sorts of things. So this strategic cooperation is only deepening with the appearance of new Russian assets, naval assets in the Pacific. We have evidence to show within the last 3 to 5 weeks that Russian submarines have actually been deployed around the world to all major ocean theaters, and NATO does not know where they are at. So with this with this development that we're seeing play out right now in this optical World War III situation, we can draw many parallels, right? Q tells us to remember The Hunt for Red October, The Sum of All Fears, other movies, cinema, things like that, where these deep state Luciferians have always sort of goofed on us symbolically. Q reminds us that we're turning that symbolism on them, but much of that symbolism is going to be applied in the kinetic space. It's going to be a real world thing. I think that we have, and I reported several weeks back, actually it's been a couple of months ago now, that if we apply the contextual historic lens, if we go back to the history lens, the U.S. will come to a fever pitch at some point along this journey. Many people may call it a pre-Civil War pitch or a Civil War-like condition here within the United States of America, and that will happen. And it's very possible that we see Russia show up right in our own ports. It could be a Russian submarine, could be a Russian frigate, corvette, things of that nature. But that is an event, or a series of events, I should say, that occurred previously. It happened in American history at a time where the country was splitting apart. I think it's very possible that we see that again. But regardless, we have naval assets deployed around the world, many of which I'm sure that we don't know the exact locations and certainly not the mission objectives of, but some of which we do optically. We can see that showing up on information engines such as Twitter. You can't use Google, folks. You really can't find this sort of information utilizing the Google platform, simply because it is so heavily controlled and heavily influenced by the deep state AI systems that purge results, that shut down any sort of information that would be disadvantageous to our enemies. I highlighted this recently with Russia's banning of Obama and several other, actually it was about 500 to 650, depending on the source that you read, individuals from coming, from coming into the country. And of course, the Google search engine, if you went to type in Russia bans President Obama, it came up with absolutely zero results. We know that that's not the case. We know that that's not true. So remember, when we research, Twitter is a fantastic forum to go and find a lot of this open source information, .gov websites, .mil websites, even .org websites going back several years, highlighting records that have been kept online, digitized, and maybe have been, I shouldn't say immune to, but who have managed to slip by the crawlers that go through the cyberspace area, the cyberspace arena of the world, and have sort of managed to stay under the radar. You can find a lot of great information when we take that approach. The Russian military is preparing overall for a dramatic expansion of these conflicts. We've got the conflict in Ukraine that has been raging for a while. We've got the liberation recently of Bakhmut. I know some people have put out that that is some sort of a marker or some sort of a pivotal moment in this military campaign worldwide. I can't confirm something like that, but I can say that Bakhmut has been home to a tremendous amount of bioterrorism, just in the same fashion that Mariupol was. And it's worth noting that symbolically, exactly 1 year after Bakhmut, or excuse me, after Mariupol fell to the Russian military, we have the Bakhmut city. That's a very large city, or formerly a very large city, a very industry capable arena, the centerpiece of a lot of trafficking, underground bases, of course, being in that area. That has now fallen exactly 1 year later to the Wagner Group. Prigozhin has come out and said that the Wagners will not return to operational combat status before the end of June. I think it's worth highlighting that this is the same Prigozhin that used heavy amounts of disinformation regarding the availability of ammunition, the availability of combat capability and combat assets just several weeks ago. And we saw that sort of draw out the Ukrainian militant army, sort of give them a boost to unentrench themselves and attempt to advance. And when they came out of the woodwork, if we will, came out of their entrenched positions, their fortresses, they were immediately annihilated. So it's worth noting that this could be a disinformation campaign. We could very well see these sorts of operations resume very quickly. Vladimir Putin has scheduled July really as being the month where this special military operation will cease. What comes beyond the other side of that, I think, is anyone's guess. But it's worth highlighting that if we're going to expand this war, if NATO is going to be much more involved actively, if we're really going to have a kinetic World War III style optic being carried through to the public masses, and I believe that is a case, it's very possible that the special espionage component, the targeted surgical component of this war may be over as Russia is concerned, and they may be preparing for a full-scale land war encompassing multiple nations throughout Europe, certainly involvement in the Middle East, certainly involvement in alliance with China for what China will be doing in the Pacific theater, and that is going to be coming very soon. So sort of on that Pacific theater discussion, give me just a moment here. We're going to come over. I pulled up some very interesting information regarding what's happening in the Pacific. We have the Japanese Ministry of Defense identifying Russian ships in the region. This is just a couple of days ago. The RFS Sovershiny and the RFS Gromky, along with a Dubna-class fleet oiler, sighted this past Friday in the Sea of Japan. We have a tremendous amount of U.S. naval asset movement. We've got, according to this, 18 Russian warships have come through the Sidya Strait since the 20th of April. The Sidya Strait being north of the Japanese mainland. It looks like maybe just southwest of the Kamchatka Peninsula. We've got the USS Ronald Reagan, an American amphibious strike group currently stationed in just south of the Japanese mainland, near the Okinawa base. We've got U.S. submarines that have been moved into the area just south of South Korea. The USS Nimitz is just north of Malaysia, and we have the the Makin Island amphibious ready group down there near the Philippines. Additionally, we have a ballistic missile sub, and this is just the one that we know of, that is stationed at last reports just east of Naval Base Guam, and we have the USS Carl Vinson in the area. So this is a very volatile situation. This is a very volatile backdrop to be operating with. We know that there are certain characteristics with this white hat on black hat military alliance that are going, or excuse me, military conflicts that are going to become much more overt as we go through this process. The military industrial complex, and specifically the bad actors involved in that, will do everything that they can within their own power to resist the victory of we the people, to resist the victory of the good guys, if we want to call them that, the White Hat Alliance, within patriotic militaries, because when that comes, their involvement in bioterrorism, their involvement in the weaponization of technology against mankind, the development of weaponized technologies that were then deployed illegally against mankind, their funding of things like the CIA, their development of the mRNA kill shots. It was not just Pfizer, Moderna, the medical military complex, the medical military industrial complex that was responsible for this. It was really, it goes back to DARPA, it goes back to the CIA, and it goes back to the US DOD. These are highly salacious crimes. These are some of the most dramatic and expansive crimes against humanity that have ever been recorded. And that doesn't even begin to touch the amount of warlordship, the mercenary style activities of different military components, both in the U.S. and others, specifically in the NATO nations and really the European post-colonial era. It doesn't even begin to touch what has been done to entire nation states as a result of those complexes. So the actors that are still involved, the actors who pledge allegiance to the fake Biden regime, for example, or who pledge allegiance to the Rothschild dynasty, or to the central banksters who control the various governments in NATO and in other areas, excuse me, these individuals will fight tooth, nail, and chin to keep themselves out of tribunals and out of that public justice that we know we the people will eventually come to, as long as we continue this war and we continue this awakening. So it's worth highlighting that as we go into the summer, we're going to see some of this begin to pop off. We're going to see these events expand. We have an imminent collapse of the U.S. banking sector. The Treasury, optically, what is the Treasury is saying that we'll be out of money to pay our bills by the 15th of June, that the U.S. will default on June 1st or 2nd. You know, that will cause a tremendous shockwave throughout all financial markets, not only in North America, but all around the world. The dollar, as we've discussed a couple of different times on this program, has already been removed as the world's reserve currency, and we're living through the throes of that, the initial thrashing about of that particular process, and it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get more dramatic, and it has to by design, because as we disempower NATO militarily, we also disempower them financially. We are crippling the military-industrial complex's ability to continue to wage war, but they will use the assets, the capabilities, the equipment, the loyalties, et cetera, that they still have control of, including hidden cells, sleeper cells, espionage cells. They will deploy all of these in all different areas to prevent the overall victory, the overall justice that we the people seek, and they will fail. But it's worth noting that before they fail, we have to play these cards very carefully. We have to sort of slow walk and slow boil this process. We're already seeing some of that begin to play out in a public space as different nations begin to align with smaller nations. A good example, just recently, the US signed a security pact with Papua New Guinea amid competition with China. And at that meeting, we actually had the New Zealand Prime Minister, Chris Hoskins, meeting at a breakfast meeting with the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea in Port Moresby. So we know that New Zealand, of course, being a Five Eyes nation, Australia being a Five Eyes nation, the United States being a Five Eyes nation, putting together these security pacts with these smaller island nations helps to insulate the exposure of the bioterrorism and the child trafficking, the human trafficking, the smuggling, the slavery, the forced slavery bazaars that have been put together in these different areas of the world as different segments of their populations have been completely decimated by this cabal. New Guinea, some of the Indonesian islands, the Philippines. Recently, we had a tip-off from former Congressman and CEO of Trump Media and Technology Group, Devin Nunes, that the Azores Islands in the Atlantic would also come into the fray in this particular regard. That is a major component as well of what the military mercenary industrial complex has enabled and protected. It's not possible for all of the worldwide shipping lanes that have been participative in these incredible crimes to have been safe transiting through all international waters everywhere when you consider things like weather, marine events, piracy, other dangers that exist on the open seas. It's not possible that these, what we would call civilian shipping companies, optically, these corporate shipping companies could have maintained that level of integrity of operation, that security of operation without assistance by different navies, and certainly without assistance at different points by governments. So understanding then that we're already seeing the alliances being painted, we're already forcing the black hats into picking sides and protecting their own and insulating their own, knowing what's coming. That is a wonderful indicator of where we're at as we press forward in this war. They're very nervous, they're very scared, and they're taking unequivocal action to try and protect and hedge against the exposures, that are absolutely coming. It's very fascinating, I think, to note that at the same time all of these things are going on, we have the political situation here in the United States of America that just continues to get more dire. We have the social constructs here in the United States of America that continue to get more extreme. We have the attacks on President Trump leveling up and ratcheting up at levels that we've not yet seen. And that's really difficult, I think, for us to fathom. A lot of us out there who are ardent Trump supporters, ardent supporters of the MAGA movement, the Make America Great Again movement, it's difficult to watch because we're watching the systematic destruction of our country. But at the same time, it's worth highlighting that it's not really our country. We're watching the systematic destruction of the U.S. corporate Inc., of the U.S. government corporation, of what was a construct that was built over our land and usurped our land and usurped our rights to our own land. We're watching that construct brought down. The problem is that in order to do so, we have to go all of the way to the community level. We have to have 90+% of the individuals in the United States on board with a clear understanding. We're well on the way to that number. A lot of you have been very upset about this 70% and then this 80%. I don't know where all that's come from. I've never once claimed on this program that 80% was needed. I've always said that it had to be 90+%. Q tells us that 4 to 6% are lost forever. If we do the backwards math on that, it's 90+%. That's simply the facts. 80% is not enough. 20% of the population not being on board with a Great Awakening, especially with a military operation happening within the United States. If that operation were to go public, 80% is not enough to hedge the overall demographic of we the people, the overall societal structure against chaos, especially when we consider that, with the exception of certain information outlets and certain laws that we've been able to leverage here in the United States under this military government, this military occupation, we have a tremendous amount of AI influence and deep state influence. I shouldn't say control, but absolutely influence in the information space that will continue even right up to the point where those operations become a public fact. So it is 90+%. We do have to have that number, and we're well on the way. And the attacks against President Trump and the two-tiered justice system, the complete failure of the justice system's objectivity, the failure of the justice system to protect American citizens is all part of that. As a result of that, we're going to see more charges leveled against the commander-in-chief. We're going to see charges of seditious conspiracy filed. I do not know how those charges are going to turn out publicly and optically. I would guess that they will be either appealed immediately, or not allowed to continue to a fever pitch point. But regardless, it is going to be, that is going to come to the front. It's going to come, I believe, out of Georgia based on the research that we're seeing, the patterns of behavior that we're seeing in that area, and it's going to relate to the 2020 election. The beautiful thing about doing something like that and doing it in this fashion is that by charging a former president with seditious conspiracy, just as we charged a former president with sex crimes, and just as we charged a former president with money, financial crimes and money laundering, things of this nature, a tax evasion, I think, was what was the actual charge, but I have to go back and double check. Off the top of my head, I don't recall. But as we do all of this to a former president, we're establishing precedent to go forward and do all of this again, but do it the correct way. President Obama, treason, seditious conspiracy. Former Vice President Joe Biden, now deceased, treason, seditious conspiracy. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, now deceased, treason, seditious conspiracy, right? And so as we go forward from this point, we are allowing, and I think President Trump is allowing himself to be the scapegoat, the example, the preparatory maneuver, the original moment where we put these things down on paper, we codify them into law and precedent. We give reason for the judiciary to enforce these types of events, charges, whatever we want to call it later. And when we're able to move forward from that as we the people, as one civilization. Q tells us that it must be done right, that it has to be by the book, that it has to go through the courts. It must carry weight. We're seeing that process happen now. We're seeing that process really on full display everywhere. We've had election fraud now through the courts. We've had the abortion issue through the courts. We've had the Second Amendment and many arguments that have come up in the last 2 to 3 years that have been supportive and protective of the Second Amendment have all gone through the courts. We're going to see, as a result of the Durham report, FISA will be now involved in the court process, and FISA will be unearthed as the true court, the true Supreme Court that has been leveraged against we the people and used to protect the deep state for a very long time. Because FISA is being shown out through the FBI and through the CIA, really the FBI and CIA's involvement in things like election fraud and framing another, a different presidential candidate, et cetera, and ignoring the two-tiered system of justice, right? Participating in establishing that sort of subjectivity. We're seeing that shown out. So FISA is becoming a public topic. It's coming into the narrative space. Q tells us that FISA brings down the house. I'm not qualified to opine on exactly what that might mean, but it's extremely exciting to see that now coming to the narrative space. But it will not come fully, and it will not be over, just in my assessment, and this is just my opinion, before we see seditious conspiracy charges leveled against the former president. So as we go forward here, it's worth highlighting that these are incredible times, right? These are amazing, amazing times to be alive. It's difficult, I think, to acknowledge that when we as Americans are suffering. When we as Americans are learning what can come from electioneering, when we as Americans are experiencing firsthand the policies of a fraudulent government, a fraudulent administration, a Manchurian candidate. Many other nations around the world have been thrust into the same position that we are now in as a result of the American deep state government. as a result of the American military industrial complex and the American CIA in conjunction with the Five Eyes and the Israeli Mossad. Many other nations, many other peoples, hundreds of millions of peoples have suffered and died at the hands of an illegitimate, fraudulent government that was propped up, supported, and placed there by an American government in combination with other Western nations, other NATO nations throughout the last, certainly the last couple of centuries, but really before that. But certainly within the last 100 years or so, there's been tremendous amount of suffering around the world for the exact same reasons as what we're experiencing here in the United States. So what we need to do, and again, this is just my own personal opinion and speculation, but what we need to do is appreciate that we are sort of undoing that bad karma as we go through this process. We're sort of undoing what has occurred. We're clearing our own name. We're clearing our own honor. We're living through the same sort of situation, the same sort of circumstances that have caused incredible pain and misery throughout the rest of the world. And yes, we do owe it to them. That is something that a lot of American patriots don't like hearing. Frankly, that's not my discussion necessarily to have with those individuals on an individual basis. But if we're unable as Americans to extract ourselves from our own suffering, if we're unable to extract ourselves from our own lens, our own selfishness, then the Great Awakening is sort of a moot point, right? If we don't learn that we are part of a greater whole, and then we go and we participate in that greater whole at a much higher level, at a much more beautiful level, then this Great Awakening was really all for naught. We are part of a greater whole. We're not simply isolationists. It is disrespectful to the rest of humanity to say that. It's disrespectful to the millions and millions of people that have died at the hands of a corrupt government. It wasn't our fault. It wasn't the fault of the German people. It wasn't the fault of the United Kingdom. It wasn't the fault of the Canadian people. It certainly wasn't the fault of the American people, but our governments caused incredible malice and evil to perpetrate itself and to perpetuate itself throughout the rest of the world. So there has to be some sort of recompense, some sort of penance that gets paid from that. And I believe that we've all been living through that, and we're continuing to live through that. President Trump absolutely would have known this as he went around the world in 2017 building what became this alliance. Everyone had to have some sort of piece of the pie, but there also had to be trust. There also had to be the promise. There had to be mutual respect. There had to be appreciation from one culture, one people, one nation to another. And so as we go through this process here in the United States and in the Western nations, in France and in Germany and Austria and Italy and the UK and others, we are being purified really in a great respect, and we are earning back the respect of the rest of the world and really of our own selves as we go through this process together. It's actually a really beautiful thing when we can extract ourselves from our own selfishness and our own suffering and appreciate just how interwoven, just how interconnected we all really are. We are one, we the people around the world. We do have sovereign identities. We do have sovereign national origins. We have national histories that we're very proud of, and we have national pride, right? But really, we're all one, we the people. We believe in life. We believe in the protection of children. We believe in the elimination of war. We believe in the elimination of gaslighting. We believe in the elimination of subversion and espionage warfare. We believe in free and fair trade. We believe in having an even playing field with one another, meaning every nation that offers something to the table, be it resources, influence, control, whatever, that's all leveled at a one-to-one, so no one can take advantage of one another. These are common beliefs around the entire earth. Excuse me. So as we go through this process, I'm heartened by it, actually. I'm encouraged. Our gas prices here where I'm at just went up another 62 cents. That's not necessarily something that I love to see. I put out on TruthSocial just recently that the community that I live in, which is really a small town community of less than 100,000 people, absolutely looks destitute as we've gone through this process. The roads are in disgusting shape. The infrastructure is crumbling. The small business scene is being absolutely crushed. The money laundering and corruption is now on full display with these car washes and these different school projects. And it's the government and it's the banks and it's big pharma. You know, we've built 3 or 4 new medical offices here in the last couple of years. As local business, especially in retail, hospitality, those sectors, which are the easiest sectors for the little man to really get involved in, as those have been completely crushed. We've had these Leviathan financial projects carried out just in this community alone, and I'm certain across many communities out there with all of you, that showcase the corruption, that showcase the incest, right? That showcase what's really happening. The local economy being crippled, and jobs being really destroyed because we're building car washes instead of industry, because we're building banking institutions or storage, or storage properties and storage buildings instead of revitalizing different economic infrastructure that has gone by the wayside. And we're seeing that on display all throughout the United States. But what I'm trying to come back to is that it is encouraging in some respects, because people are beginning to pay attention. People are asking where their dollars have gone. People are asking why these sorts of things are occurring here, both in this community and others. And so it gives me a little bit of pause. They are waking up. We're sort of coming into the understanding. We took really 30 to 40% of the American population that was ready in 2020 to immediately admit that the election had been stolen. We've now converted that to more than 70%. And honestly, I think that number could even be higher, since those numbers are taken from polls that are primarily maligned and messed with. So that is incredible progress just in 3 years' time, as we continue on through the rest of this year, as we continue to see these military campaigns kick off throughout the rest of the world, which will help shake the sleepers out of their slumber, as we continue to await with bated breath, and we will see financial events coming both to the American and North American financial and business sectors, but also the Bretton Woods system as a whole, which is predominantly responsible for a lot of the economy and market behavior in Europe and in Asia. We're going to see them come into the fold. We're going to see the people awaken together. We're going to see them coming to you, asking you questions about this or that or the other. What's really happening with these different scare events? What's really happening with this war? What's really going on? Why does Joe Biden not look like Joe Biden? I just had that question posed to me recently, and that's a fantastic starting place for anyone. I had a friend of mine just recently basically come out and say, have you heard about the reptilian people? These are incredible awakening. We'll call them the open doors, the gateways, right, into this great awakening, right, where people latch on to something that's important and meaningful to them. It stirs their spirit enough for them to seek information and ask questions. They throw off the fear complex, they throw off the defensiveness, the need to be right, the need to be correct, and they get into the fold. So we're witnessing that on display. It is tough. It is difficult. It is hard to fathom. It isn't fair. I'll give everyone out there that. I'll say that with anyone. No, it's not fair, but it is how this had to be, because we had to get humanity all under the same umbrella, all with a clear understanding of what's happening in the world, or we can't progress forward. We can't eliminate this deep state. They're so snake-like. They're so capable of manipulating thought. They're so expertly versed in hiding themselves in plain sight, in redirecting blame, in attempting to obfuscate and cloud things through legalese. Have you ever read an insurance contract? It's exactly how they work in real life. It's exactly the tactics that they deploy to the information space. They intellectualize things. They try and extract the emotion away from it. And don't get me wrong, that's important to have to an extent, but compassion and moral absolution have to be factored in when we make decisions, regardless of what those decisions might be. And they've always obfuscated that. So in order for humanity to come to the point where we were all at a common understanding and we were influenceable no more, where we were not able to be, manipulated, coerced, where we didn't have our compassion weaponized against us again, as we've seen with so many of our sleepers, and especially on the leftist side of the aisle, there had to be discomfort. There had to be confusion. There had to be the exact things that we've seen playing out in the world over the last 3 years, and which are going to continue as we go through the rest of this year and into next year. Now, that's not to say that we won't begin to see military justice. The process of holding the entire deep state to account, we're talking a worldwide Leviathan. The process of holding them to account has been going on for a while. We know that the White House has been used as a military prison. We know that executions have happened within that building, and that there is a prison storehouse beneath the U.S. Capitol. We know that Guantanamo Bay has been one of the most active sites around the world militarily over the last 3 to 5 years than it's ever really been before. We know that there is a U.S. prison, or I guess we could say an alliance prison out there on USMC Camp Blaz in Guam. We know that there is at least one prison in the Antarctic Islands that's been used militarily. We know that the Russians have prisoners of war, deep state prisoners of war that they have taken. So all of this is building to a public reveal, to a public unveiling, to a public change. But that public change must be sensible. We can't slam people into the door. We can't force their consciousness up against the glass, because they will run right back into the program. We can't shoot our own foot to spite our face, if we will. We can't be proven out to be right at the expense of losing the progress that we've had. It's not feasible. It's not strategic. It makes no sense. And we have individuals out there from all different patriot militaries and all different nations who are putting their lives on the line, literally every single day, to eradicate the kinetic real world infrastructure, the assets, the equipment, the capabilities, the research that this deep state has managed to put together and hide and leverage against we the people. It is worth highlighting as we go through the rest of this year, and certainly through the rest of this month and in the next couple of months, that major false flag events, more than one, are now in process, and we have evidence of this. We have tsunami warnings starting to kick off from the USGS and other geological surveys throughout the world. We have earthquakes that are happening with very large magnitude in coastal areas and off islands in different areas of the world. All of us know why many of those occur. It is possible that we have HAARP involved in that from a deep state actor level. I can't confirm that, but it is very possible that we have that going on. But regardless, we're seeing these events being set up now. 60,000 pounds of explosives, for example, missing from a Union Pacific Railway train. Union Pacific is owned by BlackRock and Vanguard, right? So these are the same individuals who would be seeking to distance themselves from the child trafficking being exposed, the JP Morgan and the central banks all around the world, which amounts to the governments, right, all around the world, participating in organized, child and human trafficking. So they're seeking to protect themselves. We've got U.S. senators now being issued satellite phones and in preparation for a communications blackout. We have the FDA of all individuals and entities talking about a blackout for the internet concerning the issue of misinformation and disinformation. The narrative space has absolutely been ramped up. We have former President Obama, the actor playing former President Obama, the actor playing Hillary Clinton right now, coming out, doing interviews with different pundits and on different shows, saying that we have to, rid the world of misinformation and disinformation. We have to take control of the information. We have to shut down alternative news. It has to be only mainstream. They're saying that MAGA is going to kill people, that MAGA are terrorists, things like this. So they're preparing and seeding the narrative space. And we have the kinetic real world events, which I just highlighted a moment ago with the explosives, the FDA, the satellite phones. We have these kinetic events happening in real world in real time, showing us that they are preparing for exactly that. I've said for a while, really started back in September, that a major false flag would happen on U.S. soil. Q tells us to read and be familiar with the book called The Sum of All Fears, which details a nuclear false flag event. Several different bombs in several different large-scale sports stadiums throughout the United States, dirty bombs. It's possible that we see something like that. It's worth noting that 60,000 pounds of any sort of explosive material, that's going to be one heck of a bang. So it's just, be alert, stay sharp. Stay aware of the things that are going on. We are not through this conflict yet. This conflict is really beginning to heat up. President Trump told us it was going to heat up when he said that we were embarking upon the final battle. The final battle is the final battle. The final battle is an existential moment in any conflict. It's always the bloodiest. It's always the most savage. It's always the furthest reaching, if we will. You're going to see the most desperation, the most amount of Hail Marys. Anything that the enemy has left to throw gets thrown, because at the conclusion of a final battle, the war is over. There is a victor, there is a loser, and the loser will be held to account for whatever the loser's crimes or criminality may or may not have been. It's never been we the people. or excuse me, the victor has never been we the people. It's always been them. For the first time in history, they're going to lose. They're going to lose against the very enemy that they never thought they would lose against. They're going to lose against at the hands of the very individuals that they never thought would pose a threat, that they always believed they had under control and under their thumb. They're going to lose. And that's something that is sort of unfathomable and incomprehensible for them. So expect all of the Hail Marys, expect all of the desperation to come from them. Understand why it's happening, appreciate where we're at, understand why it has to be this way. Because if we keep our focus where it needs to be, which is the prize, the promised land, the other side of this war, the total dethronement and destruction of the deep state Luciferian machine, the end of the Canaanite child sacrifice religion, the end of pedophilia, and the reclassification of pedophilia and these sorts of crimes as capital crimes punishable by death. That's the goal. That's the new world, a rebuilt economy, a rebuilt nation, a rebuilt world together. We, the people, coming into our own in all different sectors and segments of society, reclaiming healthcare, reclaiming law, reclaiming business and finance, reclaiming the retail consumer space, reclaiming the hospitality consumer space, reclaiming academia. These are the goals. They will attempt to distract, obfuscate, and terrorize us with what capabilities they still have left. We will not let that happen. The digital army is fierce and lethal. We destroy their narratives in hours and they can't stand it. So as we go forward through this process, understand that false flags are coming. Understand that those desperation moves are coming, that they have to understand that they're going to lose control of the financial system over the coming weeks and months, that they're going to lose control optically. They've already lost control in the background to a great extent, but we're bleeding out the rest of their resources and they're almost dry. As we go through this process of taking over the rest of the dark currency, of making sure that there is no capability to fund this sort of criminality and to fund these evil governmental entities throughout the world, as that happens, they lose their best card. They lose their best capability. How do you pay migrant caravans? How do you pay mercenaries? Well, you use cash. How do you pay individuals off at the shipyard to be mum's the word about things like children being trafficked in containers? You use cash. When it's worthless and when it's expended and it's no longer available, a tremendous amount of the lower level mules, these sort of useful idiots that they have, will come over to our side because it's simply disadvantageous for them to continue in criminality. And they will be held to account for whatever portions and parties they had in different, human rights abuses and severe criminal behavior as well. But as we go through this process, it is existential for our enemy and it is existential for us. And there's way more of us than there are them. I hope that you are encouraged by that. I hope that you take some time to step outside and appreciate just how vibrant the sun is, just how vibrant the birds chirping in the trees are. I hear the birds now every morning as I go out on my back porch. It's a beautiful sound. They're not bothered at all. They understand that Yahweh wins. They understand that the Creator has already established himself and into the future for generations to come. They already understand that there is no extinction level event that will happen for humanity. There is only the extinction of the deep state. That's not to say that we haven't lost millions on this journey. It's not to say that we haven't had a costly, bloody, savage war over the last 7 to 8 years. It's not to say any of that, right? It's to appreciate the fact that because of what we have lived through, humanity will never have to live through this again. Our children will never inherit a world that is stacked against them and seeks to destroy them. Different nations around the world will never again be manipulated into poverty and destitution. Resources around the world will be properly valued. The posterity of different nations around the world, not only in the US and not only in Europe, but all around our earth, will be safeguarded as we go through this process, and nature already knows it. So as we spend some time in nature and we spend some time in God, we find that peace that surpasses all understanding, and it is going to be necessary to handle the events to come. We must be calm. We must be sharp. We must understand that it is needed. Q continues to tell us it had to be done this way. It really, really did. We were never going to get all of humanity into the fold and all of humanity on board with the things that we have to know, that we have to understand, that we have to acknowledge are true. It was never going to happen any other way. We have to go through this process and we must see it through to the end, and we will. I love all of you out there. I know that it's tough. We suffer in this home just as you suffer in yours. We have difficulties in this home just as you have in yours. The recovery period from my surgery, for example, has been made particularly arduous by the inability to do very simple things that would be easily available and easily accessible and likely easily recoverable if we had military level technology, medical beds, sonic healing, things like this, that had already been released, right? It would be amazing. And yet we do not. We suffer just like you do, but we suffer knowing that there is a true paradise ahead for us, that there is a golden age, that there is a period in human history that we are going to inaugurate and begin and force to happen. We're going to bring an era of suffering and pain to a complete end. It will never again be. It will never be this way in this world ever again. Light wins. Love wins. We, the people, win, and we win because God wins. So, Patriots, as you go out there today, as you run your errands, as you hug your children, as you appreciate who you really are before the Creator, as you get in touch with the spirit that creates worlds, that sustains you right here and now, appreciate that you are powerful and draw confidence, comfort, security, and peace from it. Appreciate who and what you are. Teach your children who and what they are. Get in touch with nature. It's the perfect expression of God's love. Nature never toils against itself. It works in perfect balance and harmony. And it is supposed to work in perfect balance and harmony with us. Take some time today. Take a few deep breaths and appreciate the next phases. They're coming, and we will be ready. I'll be back with each of you again soon. This is SGAnon. Thanks. Bye-bye.